Better, yeah. The Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies was adopted in June 2022 at the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference, MC12, after more than 20 years of negotiations. And speaking personally, this really gladdened my heart. But much more than this, the agreement represents a historic achievement as it's the first WTO agreement with sustainability at its core, linking binding subsidy disciplines to sustainability of fisheries rather than purely trade effects. Specifically, the agreement prohibits subsidies that contribute to illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU fishing, subsidies for fishing of stocks that are in an already overfished condition, and subsidies to fishing in the unregulated high seas, that is, areas outside of national competence and outside the competence of any regional fisheries management organization. These harmful practices play a major role in the overexploitation of the world's already stressed fish stocks, and they have direct negative consequences for this region. IUU fishing alone costs the Caribbean region an estimated 700 to 900 million US dollars each year, so about 20 to 30% of the value of total landings. Also, around 40% of the commercially harvested fish stocks in the region are either overexploited or depleted, and thus are in a highly vulnerable condition. Illegal and unsustainable practices jeopardize the livelihoods of the thousands of people who depend on fisheries and lawfully work in the sector, as well as harming food security, national economies more broadly, not to mention the harm to the ocean ecosystem. Your government's positive actions in this domain demonstrate how seriously you take these problems. To name just a few, several CARICOM members are parties to the FAO's agreement on port state measures to prevent, deter, and eliminate IUU fishing. And member countries of the Western Central Atlantic Fishery Commission have adopted a regional plan of action to prevent, deter, and eliminate IUU fishing. Of course, the negative effects of harmful fishing practices are further amplified when government money flows to support them, even if unintentionally. The Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies thus provides a powerful complementary tool to reinforce the other important policy initiatives for sustainable fisheries that your governments are pursuing, such as those against IUU fishing. All of your governments clearly recognize this complementarity and the benefits for the region when they agreed to adopt the agreement at MC12. But adoption by the WTO members is not enough. The agreement's positive effects can begin only when it enters into force. And this requires 2/3 of WTO members, so 110 members, to deposit their individual instruments of acceptance with the WTO Secretariat. As of today, we've received 72 instruments, so we need only 38 more for entry into force. Many members, including some in the Caribbean, have indicated being quite advanced in their domestic processes. So we expect more instruments to be deposited in the near future, and our Director General is really pushing to try to have the agreement enter into force by June this year. The 6 WTO members from this region that have deposited instruments of acceptance to date are, in the order in which they arrived, Belize, Cuba, St. Lucia, Barbados, Dominica, and Haiti. This is extremely encouraging, and I hope that for those of you still working on your ratifications, this very timely workshop will provide concrete guidance that will enable you to bring your processes to a speedy conclusion. While governments in the Caribbean are engaged in efforts to improve the sustainability of fisheries, including by tackling IUU fishing, we all know how difficult and resource intensive this is. And implementing this new agreement on fishery subsidies, while very beneficial, clearly will add to these challenges. The agreement explicitly recognizes this in its Article 7 on technical assistance and capacity building. That article provides for a voluntary funding mechanism to support developing and LDC members to implement the agreement. And this is not at all an empty provision. To the contrary, the WTO Fisheries Funding Mechanism Trust Fund, what we call the Fish Fund, was officially created in November 2022, just a few months after the agreement was adopted. And to date, the fund has received contributions and pledges totaling around $16 million US, including 2 million in new pledges that were announced at MC13. Jonathan Werner here, who is the manager of the fund, is here and will be making a presentation about the fund during this workshop. And without stealing his thunder, you should know that the fund has established a steering committee and several working groups, and they are all hard at work getting everything into place so that as soon as the agreement enters into force, developing and LDC members that have deposited their instruments of acceptance will be able to receive financial support from the fund. So having access to the fund is another really good reason to accelerate your domestic ratification processes as much as possible. I know I'm about out of time, so let me end by briefly touching on the second wave of negotiations on fisheries subsidies. That is to establish disciplines on subsidies contributing to overcapacity and overfishing. Members were not able to agree on this pillar of the disciplines at MC12 in 2022, and ministers there instructed members to keep working on them and to try to conclude those further negotiations by MC13 this year. And pursuant to those instructions, members have engaged in an intensive work program for the past year, culminating last month in Abu Dhabi. Unfortunately, we were not able to reach a final outcome on these issues, in spite of very, very hard work by members, including sleepless nights at MC13, but we came very close. And most encouragingly, some very important new areas of convergence were built on issues that had been deadlocked for several years. So real progress was made. And reflecting this, at last week's meeting of the WTO General Council, many members and groups, including CARICOM, expressed a strong desire to capture and build on the progress that was made at MC13 so that the second wave of negotiations can be concluded in the nearest possible future. The negotiating group chair said that he will be in touch with members regarding possible next steps, and in the meantime has indicated his availability to consult with any interested members. So work will continue and is continuing in Geneva. I look forward to working with all of you over the next 2 days. This concludes my remarks, and thank you so very much for your attention.